It's time to introduce you to my latest creation, GeckoMan. If you're ready to discover how to create your own GeckoMan, let's do it. How many steps is that going to take to create your own GeckoMan, you ask? How about 7 easy steps? All right, enough with the deep, eccentric voice. All right, so step number 1 is prepping your document with the 4 images included for download via the link in the description. So find that link, follow it, and hit that big old download button and unzip the file to reveal all 4 images. All right, let's create a new document at 2400 by 3000 pixels. And the reason why I chose this format is it's the recommended format for Instagram posts. So when you're done creating your own GeckoMan, go ahead and share your Instagram post in the comments so we can all check out your creation, and I'll post mine as well. All right, once you download your images, you need to unzip the file, and then you can go inside the folder. You can grab all 4 images and drag and drop into your new document, and they'll be added as new layers. Now, if that doesn't work for you, you can go up to File and select Open as Layers, and then select your files to add them that way. All right, so the next thing we need to do is take this textured layer and fill in the gap at the top and the bottom by going to Layer, Transform, and clicking on Rotate 90 degrees. Let's go ahead and move that just above the background layer here, and let's double click here and rename this Texture. The next thing I want to do is I want to take this layer here, and I want it to fit inside of the canvas. Based on the layer boundary right here, we can see that it's going beyond or larger than the canvas. So let's go up to Layer and select Scale Layer. We're going to type in 2400 for the width. Once you click your Tab key, it should update the height to 3600 if you have it locked together right here. Go ahead and scale the image. And now we need to go ahead and move the image up higher because his arms are being cut off down here. So we're going to grab our Move tool and move it up. All right, we now need to take our gecko layer here and flip him so that he's looking in the same direction as our humanoid here. And we're going to go up to Layer and select Transform and Flip horizontally. And then I'm just going to go ahead and move him down just a little bit. Right about there should be pretty good. And what we need to do now for step 3 is mask our subject. So in other words, we need to make a selection of our subjects and remove the background. If you're not sure how to do that, I have an entire playlist with several tutorials showing you how to remove backgrounds. So make sure to check that out. The link is in the description below. Now, for this particular project, what I would recommend doing is using the foreground select tool. And I'm going to go ahead and do this real quick. Again, you can see the full tutorial in that playlist, but I just want to go ahead and get started with the selection process with this tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag an outline along the outer edge of our gecko and try and get as much of this neck as possible. And this doesn't have to be right along the edge because the second step of using this tool is going to allow us to add or brush on where the selection should be. I'm going to go back to the beginning until I get that yellow circle to connect it, and then Enter or Return will get us into phase 2, which is going to give you this brush tool. Now I can begin painting in the area that should be included with the selection. So my foreground is my gecko, and make sure in the tool options here you have Draw Foreground selected. And what I like to do when I start out with this is I like to create an outline inside of my subject like so, and then I'll fill it in with a larger brush later on. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect because all we're doing is giving GIMP reference information about our subject, which includes the color, the texture, the contrast levels, and it's going to take all that information and try and find the subject exactly where it is so it can apply a selection to it. Now, if your color of your brush that you're applying right now is not white, that's okay. It doesn't matter what color it is. It's just using the foreground color that you have selected in that foreground color swatch. I'm going to go ahead and increase my brush size now. And you'll notice that the overlay is updated now. So this darker area is not included in the selection process. And the blue overlay here includes the background. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest of this overlay here, or remove it, or I should say add to it, so that GIMP knows, okay, all these colors and textures should be part of the selection. Now, once I have that done, the overlay is going to update again. Click Enter, Return, and then GIMP is going to begin utilizing its AI technology to determine where the edge of our subject and the background are, and it's going to update the overlay accordingly. All right, now that that blue overlay is along the edge of our gecko, I now can hit the select button up here, and then we will get our selection around the lizard, or I should say the gecko. And then we need to apply our layer mask to remove the rest of the image layer. We're going to come right here and click on selection and click add to apply your layer mask, and everything disappears. How cool is that? So that's how you remove a background quickly and easily. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn off these layers because this selection tool, like any selection tool, is not 100% perfect. Sometimes you'll need to go in and tweak the selection process or the masking of your subject. So I'm going to go ahead and deselect now with Control-Shift+A. And if I grab my zoom tool here, I can zoom in and you can kind of see that this part of the gecko was not included in that masking. So what I want to do is make sure that my layer mask is selected. I'm going to grab my paintbrush tool with the letter P. And then what I can do is I can paint with white. Just set your foreground color here to white. And then painting with white will add the gecko back. Now, if you add too much, I'm adding the background now, I can press the letter X to place the black in the foreground color swatch, as long as that background color swatch was black to begin with. So X is just going to flip those colors back and forth. So white adds and black removes. So now I can begin removing or hiding those pixels of the background. So I'm not going to go around my gecko here and make it perfect. I'll let you do that yourself. Otherwise, we would be here all day. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out with Control-Shift+J. Now what we need to do is create a mask for this layer here. And instead of going through all of that again, I'm just going to cheat and make this a little quicker so you're not sitting here for the rest of the day. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my layer mask that I created from this initial project earlier. I'm going to click and drag it over the tab. And once I release, it will be added in. I can go ahead and delete this layer now. And what I want to do is rename this torso. And I'm going to rename this one gecko head. All right, make sure your image preview thumbnail layer here, the gecko, not the layer mask, is selected. Grab your move tool with the letter M, and then go ahead and move your gecko into position. And I want to align the neck with the right side of the collar right here. And step 3 is all about filling in the gap. What do I mean by that? Well, if we take a look at the collar over here, we need to fill in the gap between the collar and his neck by increasing the size of our gecko's head to be larger. So we're going to do that with the scale tool. So you can grab that from the toolbar or use Shift+S. So once you select that tool, go ahead and click on your gecko. Just make sure it's selected in the layers panel first. And you'll notice once it's activated that the gecko layer is now above the shirt layer. That's okay. Once you finish scaling, it will go back into position. Now this is the hard part because you have to try and determine how large to make your gecko head to fill in that gap. Now I know this because I've done this before. It's right around 4880 for the width. We can click right here and drag it over to reposition it as needed. And it's not 100% perfect, or that gap isn't completely filled, which is fine. We're going to do that in the next stage of this step. Let's go ahead and hit enter or return. And now that we can see this gap, we're going to go ahead and zoom in so we can fill in that gap by copying pixels from over here or this side of the neck and pasting them over here. So we're going to clone the pixels, and we're going to do that with the clone tool. So we're going to grab the clone tool with the letter C. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell GIMP these are the pixels, or use this area as the reference to copy pixels from here to here. Now, to give GIMP a reference point, we need to hold down our Control key and click on the area that we want to use as the reference point, and we're left with another circle. Now, when I begin painting in this area, the circle is going to follow the direction of the brush, and it's going to copy those pixels from here and put them over here. One problem though, we won't be able to see those pixels because of the layer mask. Now, to fix that temporarily, we're going to come over here and right click on our layer mask, and we're going to select Disable Layer Mask. Now I can come over here and begin painting, and because it's under the shirt layer, we don't have to worry about making it perfect. We can go over here and we're not going to see it. All right, now we can come over here, right click and select Disable Layer Mask again to turn it back on. Only problem is those pixels are gone. So we're going to grab our layer mask here again, and we're going to reveal those pixels now by painting with, that's right, white with our paintbrush tool. So I'm going to go ahead and paint in this area to reveal those pixels. Now I have a little bit of a mess over here, so I'm going to go ahead and paint over here with white, and I'm going to switch to black just to kind of realign this neck with this part of the shirt, so it looks like it's inside of there and not bulging out. All right, let's zoom out with Control-Shift+J. All right, step 4 is all about setting the scene. So what we're going to do now is work on our background layers. I'm going to go ahead and turn off these layers and turn on the shape and the texture layer. The first thing I want to do is fill in our background color here with a lavender color. So let's click on our foreground color swatch and choose a lavender color. If you want to use the same color, this is the hexadecimal number right here. Go ahead and type that in, click OK. Grab your bucket fill tool with Shift+B and click, and well, we can see the color over here in the layer, but the texture layer is covering it up, so we need to blend the two layers together. So I'm going to grab my texture layer and I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to soft light, and boom, we now have our lavender color. I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer now. We're going to call it blue because I want to fill it in with blue. So let's go ahead and grab our color here, and this is the hexadecimal color that I want to use for my blue color. We're going to go ahead and fill it in with the foreground color, and boom, we have blue. But again, we can't see anything below it. So let's change the blending mode to multiply this time. All right, we now have blue, but it's a little too intense for me. So I'm going to go ahead and drop my opacity down to, I don't know, right around 80 to 85. So that looks pretty good. Now I want to add a little bit more depth to my texture layer here, and I'm going to do that by changing the colors with hue. And we can do that by going to colors and selecting hue saturation. And I'm going to increase the hue to, I don't know, 155, 160 or something like that. Now it doesn't look like anything has really happened, but if you turn on the preview button on and off, you'll notice that there's some purple colors coming through on this side and a little bit over here. So it's kind of subtle, but I think it adds a little bit more depth and interest with our background there. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. All right, let's go ahead and grab our half circle next. And I want to go ahead and blend that in as well. So let's change the mode to, let's try overlay. Okay, I like that. And too intense, so let's drop the opacity down to around 85 as well. Now there's one more thing I want to do before we move on to step 5, and that is creating a vignette. So let's go ahead and turn on our gecko humanoid here. And this is going to help us position the vignette exactly where we want it. But first, we need to create a new layer called vignette. And we need to make sure we fill it with transparency. And to add a vignette, I'm going to go up to Filters, Light and Shadow, and select Vignette from here. Now you can reposition, resize, and alter your vignette either with these circles and these lines here, or with the sliders. I kind of like doing it from here. I'm going to make this a little bit shorter, a little bit thinner, and create more of an oval shape. And I'm going to click and drag along the outside to rotate it. And then I can click in here and reposition it. Now, if you plan on doing multiple animal-human hybrid composites, you may want to save your settings to reuse those vignette settings for a future project. Just click right here to create a preset. Make sure you give it a name to remember it by, and it's going to save all those settings. Now I did create one for this project earlier. So if I click right here, I have my human hybrid preset. Once I click on that, all those settings are updated. And those are the settings that I want to use. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now that's a little bit too dark if you ask me. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the opacity down. I don't know. What do you think? I'm going to go right around 65 to 70. So I think maybe right about there looks pretty good. All right, step 5 is all about dropping that shadow. What do I mean by that? Well, it's now time to start blending our head and our torso together so they look like they're one and not two separate elements. And that's because right now the contrast, the color of light, and the direction of the light is different for both the head and the torso. So we need to start working on blending them together. And the first thing I want to do is create a drop shadow of our head onto the torso. So if we take a look at the torso, the lighting direction is coming from behind, and it looks like maybe directly behind or maybe a little bit to the left. It's kind of hard to tell, but we know it's coming from behind and above because of the direction of the drop shadows here. Now the gecko, the direction of light is also coming from behind the head and up above based on where those shadows are dropping, but I think it's more to the right versus the left. So we'll fix that, but we'll do it in a different step. Let's first make a selection of our gecko head here to create our drop shadow. So we're going to grab the layer mask here. We're going to right click and select mask to selection to give us that selection around the head again. We're going to go ahead and create a new layer called shadow. And let's go ahead and fill it in with black. I'm going to grab my bucket fill tool with Shift plus B. And once I click inside, I now have part of my shadow. Okay, let's deselect, Control Shift plus A. And this is probably the hardest part of this composite. What we're going to do is use our Unified Transform tool to flip the shadow and place them over here. Put that drop shadow over in this area, right? So what we're going to do first is I'm going to zoom out, because it's going to be hard to flip with the Unified Transform tool because we need to put those anchor points all the way down here, and I'll show you what I mean. Let's go ahead and grab that Unified Transform tool. I'm going to go ahead and click right here, and now we have our outline of our tool. So we're going to grab the corners, the sides, or whatever we need to do to reposition, flip, rotate, everything that we need to do for our drop shadow. And there's different parts of the Unified Transform tool that's going to allow you to do that. So if you take a look at the corners here, we have a square, and inside we have a diamond. So square is just going to resize, but the diamond is going to allow you to grab that corner and position it anywhere on your canvas. So make sure it's highlighted and click and drag below the canvas. Now, if you're zoomed in tighter like I was before, then you're not going to be able to do this. I'm going to bring this one down as well, and then these corners I'm going to bring up higher. Now we need to try and position that drop shadow so that it's right along the collar here. So we just need to continue manipulating each one of these corners until we get it into the position that we need. Now at this point, I have the shadow of our head on his neck, and I don't want that. So we'll fix that in a second. What we need to do now, once we have the position right for our shadow, we're going to hit enter or return to apply it into that position. Let's also go ahead and move that above the torso so we can actually see it. All right, now we're going to go ahead and zoom back in. And what I want to do next is I want to soften up the edges of our shadow so it blends in a little bit better. Because right now with the hard edge, it's not really matching the quality of the light that's on his t-shirt, which is much softer than what this shadow is giving us right now. So we're going to go up to Filters, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I don't know, we're going to increase this. That's too much. Let's go to right around 20 to 25. I'm going to go with 22, and that softened up the edges to match the quality of the light. The only thing is it's too dark, and we need to blend in the shadow with the t-shirt as well. So we're going to come up here, and we're going to select, let's try Overlay. And let's also drop the opacity down to help blend it in a little bit more. And just like that, we have a very realistic shadow, if you ask me. So I'm going to go right around 65. Let's turn that on and off. And you can definitely see that we have a shadow now on his shirt. It's not too intense. It's blending in. We can see the rest of the shirt. So it's definitely creating the shadow that I want. Now we need to get it off the neck and off the background over here. So I'm going to add a layer mask in white. And then with my paintbrush tool, I can paint with black to remove it. I'm going to go ahead and drop the hardness of my brush down to 0 because I want a very soft edge as I work along the edge of his arm right here and up here in his neck area as well. So just paint over this area until you have all of that shadow removed from his neck. Now we are going to add more shadows on the neck. I just want to do it separate from this layer. All right, Control Shift and J to zoom all the way back out. All right, step 6 is creating a sunburn. What do I mean by that? Well, we need to start working on the quality and the harshness of the light. In other words, we need to adjust the contrast of the head and the torso so that they're much closer together, because right now the head of the gecko is much brighter versus the torso. So one has a little bit more contrast than the other. So we want to try and make those match closer together. And we're going to do that by creating a tone curve for both. And we're going to apply some dodging and burning, which is where the sunburning comes in. And I'll explain that in just a second. Let's first go ahead and grab our torso preview thumbnail right here so we can add an S curve to our shirt. So we're going to go up to colors and click on curves. Now, if you've never heard the term S curve, let me explain what that is real quick. What we're going to do is we're going to adjust this linear line to alter the tonal range, the brightness levels of the tonal range in the image. So on your tone curve, you have your shadows and your blacks on the left, midtones in the middle, and the highlights on the right. So if I click here and drag up, that torso is getting brighter. Now, what I want to do is add contrast. So I'm going to do the opposite in the blacks and the shadows. I'm going to click here and drag down. And that makes that area darker and creates contrast at the same time. Now, if you take a look at the tone curve, it looks like an S. So this is a popular technique for adding contrast and altering the amount of contrast that you want in the highlights and shadows based on your creative vision. If we take a look at the before and after, we've definitely increased the contrast. Now, I'm going to go ahead and decrease the shadows and the blacks here because it's a little bit too dark. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the gecko head. I may need to do more or less contrast depending on what I need to do to get the contrast to match or get as close as possible with the shirt. So I may need to make this a little bit darker. And just like that, we're starting to see how the gecko's head is starting to match the contrast level of the torso. All right, I think that looks good. Let's go ahead and click OK. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I want to apply the sunburn effect, which means I want to do some dodging and burning. So I'm going to grab my dodge and burn tool here or use Shift+D. Now, the reason why I call it the sunburn effect is if you look at your tool options here, you'll see two types, dodge and burn. So dodge is going to make parts of your image brighter when you brush on your image with the tool brush that is selected automatically when you select this tool. Now, if you select burn, it's going to make that area darker. So I like to refer to it as the sunburn effect because it's just an easier way to remember which one does which. So if you want to burn, you're going to make it darker. The other thing you can do is you can target the tonal ranges of your layer by selecting the range from here. So shadows, midtones, or highlights. Now, for the start of this edit, I want to select the midtones, and then I'll go into the shadows and the highlights to alter the lighting in that part of the tonal range if needed. The other thing you can do is you can start off with a lower exposure of say around 50 versus 100. And at a lower setting, that will allow you to build up the edit slowly versus applying it all at once, which is going to help you create a much more natural edit versus trying to do it all at the same time. All right, so what I'm going to do is darken up the neck of the gecko because the lighting is coming from top and behind. This area I think should be darker along the collar here. So I'm just going to click and drag along this area multiple times until I achieve the darkness level that I want for this area. I'm going to actually increase this to 100 now just to speed this up a little bit. And then we'll continue with different parts of the neck and different tonal ranges if needed. So now I'm just going to follow where the shadows are on this side of the gecko and just make it a little bit darker in the midtones and maybe along his eye right here as well. And this is also going to add some depth to our gecko as well. Now, if you want, go ahead and select your highlights, adjust your exposure if needed, and then you can go ahead and darken up those highlights as well. I'm not liking how that's turning out, so I'm going to go ahead and undo that with Command or Control plus the letter Z. Now, what I want to do is I want to grab my torso here, and I want to darken up the midtones along the collar here, because again, I think this should be darker for this part of the shadow versus the rest of it down here. So I'm just going to continue applying multiple strokes in this area to kind of darken up this side of the shirt, because his head is a lot larger than the original head he had. So it should be darker in this area. I may go back to the gecko's head here and continue playing with this. So I'm not going to make this perfect because you're going to spend a little bit more time on this than I am now that you know how to do some dodging and burning. All right, so step 7 is creating the cinematic experience, and we need to do some work on the colors of the torso and the head so that they better match in terms of the color of light. We're also going to do some sharpening and some other stuff as well to finish up our GeckoMan. So let's go ahead and start off by clicking on our shadow layer, and we're going to go ahead and create a new layer called Color Grading, and we're going to fill it with transparency. Click OK. And then for the color, I'm going to choose this yellow color right here. Let's go ahead and fill it in with our bucket fill tool. Click and add. Let's go ahead and blend it in with the layers below by changing the blend mode to multiply. And let's also change the opacity to right around 50 or so. Now that adjusted the colors of everything. So it's actually changing the color of your background. If you don't want that to happen, let's do this. Let's come down here and turn off all these layers of the background. And let's also turn off the color grading layer. Let's go up to Layer and select New from Visible, which is going to merge the visible layers into one versus 3 separate layers. Now we can go ahead and turn everything back on. And then let's move our color grading layer above. And then come down here and click on this icon here to merge that color grading layer with the layer below. And now it's not affecting your background. All right, so what I want to do next is I want to alter the saturation of the colors. They're a little bit too saturated for my taste. So I'm going to go up to Colors, Hue, Saturation, and adjust the saturation to the left to, that's too much. So maybe right around 30 or so. So let's take a look at the before and after, and I like that a lot better. So I probably should have done that before I applied my color grading layer, because it's going to give me a different result by doing it before versus after. So you can play around with that to see which you prefer. Go ahead and click OK to adjust your saturation. And the next thing I want to do is I want to target the head and sharpen the head a little bit, because it's a little bit too soft right now. So what I want to do is I want to grab my layer mask on my gecko head layer here and create a selection. This way I'm targeting just the sharpening of the gecko head and nothing else. But we need to make sure that this layer is now selected. And then you can go up to Filters, Enhance, and select Sharpen Unsharp Mask. So I'm going to go ahead and increase this to right around 6 to 8. And if we turn the preview on and off, you can definitely see it's much sharper. And because of this technique, we are only targeting the sharpening on the head. Let's go ahead and click OK and apply that and deselect. Another thing I want to do is I want to brighten up these eyes just a little bit. So I need to go back to my Dodge and Burn tool. And this time, to make the eyes brighter, which tool do I need to use? That's right, the Dodge tool. And then I'm just going to paint along the outside here to make that part of the eye brighter. All right, maybe just a little bit more. Let's go ahead and zoom out with Control-Shift+J. And one more thing before you go. I and GeckoMan need your help. How? Well, we want to make this the most watched GIMP tutorial on this side of the Milky Way. And you can make that happen by liking, commenting, and sharing this GIMP tutorial. Thanks for watching. And when you're done creating your GeckoMan, make sure to grab your pooper scooper and watch where you step.